Okay, everybody, and welcome here to what is going to be the battle map tutorial that I begin hosting for you all. So today we're going to simulate a small scale battle between a small British army here consisting of about 45 infantry, a command square, 6 cavalry, and 2 artillery, as well as a mounted general. Today isn't about showcasing full strength armies, it's more just about giving you guys a lowdown on the basic mechanics of the game and how things are expected to play. On the opposite side here we have the French army with a group of line with a command square, again 6 cavalry, a mounted general, 2 artillery. I've added the extra models of the old guard for the French, which will give them an advantage in this battle, but again, it's not to simulate an even battle, it's just to show you guys mechanics. A different command square again, as for each standard line infantry or any other infantry that function like line infantry en masse require a command square as well to organize them. You don't need a command square, although it's handy to have. Voltigeur lights again as well, and 2 artillery in the back. So as you can see, for each army here, I've already separated and set up everyone in their regiments. This is what you're expected to do as a player. You all have your army values, and as you recruit and have casualties, you'll be in control of your armies. At the end of every battle, you should reorganize your armies back into their regiments. That way you can see exactly which regiments have suffered casualties, where you need to recruit more men to refill those regiments. If you disband certain regiments, merge certain regiments together, that is where the advantage of having your armies set up ahead of time. So this is to simulate the 2 players having both of their regiments ready to go. They join the battle together. These white lines that I've drawn down the field are the 12 inches that you're allowed for standard deployment down either side of the map here. The units that are allowed to deploy further than the 12 inches standard are line infantry, which can deploy twice as far, up to 24 inches from your table edge. For this particular battle, we won't focus on that just because I've chosen to play with such a smaller degree of battlefield here just to get quicker into the action with you guys. And so we won't worry about that today. Our light infantry will deploy within the 12 inches, but legally, according to the rules, you can. Another thing I'd like to note out quickly is that I've actually included the stats on each of my actual units. So instead of having to flip back and forth from the Discord, I'm actually able to have right on my units. I can see here that they hit on 2s, they hit on 3s, hit and wound on 3s in close combat. They can form square. But we'll go over what all of that means as the game progresses. So for this particular battle, as with all battles, the attacker will go first. Now, what that means in this particular battle, the French are going to be the attackers, and as such, the French are going to be allowed to roll to go first for deployment. That can change, however, as I load in some dice here. So, while the attacking player does go first, before you deploy before you go ahead and deploy any of your units, the defending player gets a chance to seize the initiative. So what that will mean is the defending player can roll a d6. He must get the result of a 6 in order for the defending player to seize the initiative. If the defending player successfully rolls a 6, they will deploy first, and then also will get the first turn during battle. If they do not roll a 6, then the attacking player will deploy first and get the first turn during battle. So I will simulate both players today. I will roll for the British. Let's see what I get. I got a 4. So as the British, I did not successfully seize initiative. So that being said, the French player will get to deploy first. It does not matter what regiment you deploy first, but all regiment is done on a turn-by-turn basis. So for the sake of this, I'll just make it simple. My old guard and the command square. Now you want to be careful how fast you move them, where you move them. You don't want to be knocking objects over and things like that. So with that being said, I will place my old guard and command square within the legal deployment there, ahead of these buildings. And now I wait for the British player, my opponent, who can now deploy a single regiment of their choosing as well in the same manner. So let's say, for today's sake, we're going to have the British player. We're not going to be, like I said, we're not going to aim to be strategically brilliant today. This is just a demonstration to show you how it goes. So with the command square, you can choose to have it on the left or the right. But you always want the command square to essentially be in line with the front row of the bases. As you'll find out, all actions, generally speaking, are done from front row of the bases. Casualties are taken off the front as well, or the closest row. So the British player has deployed their regiment there. Now we'll go back to the French player. To simulate this, the French player is going to place their artillery next. These are placed as artillery come in units of 3 as a max, so they can be placed in groups of 3 as a full regiment. The unit coherency for all models, including artillery in this, I'll place my artillery perhaps. So we've got some raised ground here. I think this would be better for my artillery, as they do get a bonus for raised ground. Unit coherency for all models is 2 inches though. And just like with the campaign map, when we use the measuring tool here, we want to make sure that we're on inches, not on centimeters, and not on grid. We go to inches, we take the line, we go from base to base. They're 1.8 inches apart base to base. They're in unit coherency. Perfect. I'll place the artillery as the second deployment for the French. I'll move on to now the second deployment for the British. We'll have them place their artillery as well. So the British players will have them place their artillery. They don't have any raised ground except for in the cemetery actually over here. So let's have the British players try to be smart and deploy up on this hill. Oh no, that's not good. So I forgot to lock the British artillery to their base. That's unfortunate. Let's see if we can get them fixed up here. This cemetery has given us a bit of grief, unfortunately. But that's okay. I think we can fix the model here. We'll just give them a little spinny spin. So we'll have to obviously keep this in mind for when we're playing. That we'll have to make sure that you guys as players attach and lock all of your bases together. So for today's sake, we won't put them on the cemetery there, just because it seems to be giving us problems. And like I said, today's more about just demonstrating to you guys how things are going to work, as opposed to making this a long, in-depth struggle of a video. So I do apologize that I did not attach the unit ahead of time. That's a me boo-boo. So there we go. I've managed to make 2 units. We salvaged the destruction of the British artillery there from that graveyard. So we'll go ahead and delete the dead bodies as they litter the graveyard there. Make some space. So the British player has now placed their artillery. Swapping back over to the French player. French player is going to take their line infantry, and they're going to have them start here in the cover of the grass. And, oh wow. Definitely need to lock our... we're going to go ahead and rewind time on that one. So that is definitely something to keep in mind when we play. Need to lock and attach everyone's models to their bases. We'll go ahead and rewind one more time. Just like all you guys, I get to learn as I go. So attaching them will obviously stop that from happening. Attaching each model to the base will treat them as a single model rather than 4 separate models on top of some bases. So we'll go ahead and place them on some flat land instead, just so we don't have to deal with that again. Oof, and even still, we lost a couple boys there. But that's okay. We'll just take our time. Next time, like I say, we'll make sure they're locked in place. So again, we'll hop over to the British player. So the British player we're going to be a little crafty with their light infantry, although we're not using the extra deployment for this battle. We're going to have them start in front of this house here. And they don't have enough deployment to deploy into the house, as it's more than 12 inches away. But we can deploy right in front of the door, so that on our movement turn, we have enough movement to enter this door on our first turn. So we'll place everybody. And by the way, all placements for bases are legal as long as the model can stand up on its own, and the base does not overlap another model's base. That's the only rules. I wouldn't stay within 2 inches. Unit coherency, so we'll put those British lights in front of that building. Switching back over to the French. We'll have the French player, and they're going to have their lights. They're going to have their lights on the side here. They're going to get ready to sort of march up the field on the flank there. Switching back now to the British player, they have their cavalry, which the British are going to set up sort of in the forested wooded area to the side. Switching back to the French player, they will take their cavalry and place them as well. Cavalry for the French will place in reserve of the artillery, ready and waiting for the British. British will then place their mounted general. We're going to place him back on the road here, so he's within the vicinity to command. And lastly, we will place the French general. Keeping in mind, you don't need to place your generals last. Models can be placed in any order. I just happen to choose to place the general. So, we have now set up the battlefield. It's good to go. The British did not seize initiative, so the French are still going to begin the battle. So the French will take their first turn. Every player's turn begins with a general's phase. The general's phase is where generals can take actions. The only current actions generals can take in the game are to use the Inspire ability. What the Inspire ability does is that in a 12-inch radius from the general, so again clicking line, you measure out from his base 12 inches, so 12 inches in this direction. So 12 inches does reach this regiment here. As you can see, it takes only 8 inches to reach that base, and 12 inches in this direction also reaches with 8.1 inches. So both my units of Old Guard and line infantry would both be in range of my Inspire ability, should I choose to use it. The trick to this is that general's phases happen. Inspire allows you to automatically pass morale tests, but morale tests take place at the end of a player's turn. The general's phase takes place at the start of a player's turn. When using the Inspire ability, you need to, the best degree that you can, sort of predict whether or not you think those units are going to be taking enough casualties that will warrant them taking a morale test. If you think they will, then Inspire is a good use to use. However, Inspire can only be used once per battle, per general. So, it's a very handy ability, but only gets a one-time use. So for this particular turn, being the first turn, I'm going to forego using my Inspire ability. And so with that being the only general's ability that I have, my general's phase has come to an end. Next, the second phase every turn is your movement phase. Now, the ability that I have of adding the stats onto these units, the third category being the MV, stands for movement. As you can see here with my Old Guard, they move 8 inches a turn. So a very simple way, and there are other ways to do it as well, but a simple way to do it is to just simply click the base, move forward the 8 inches that I'm allowed to move, ping that on the ground there, grab my models, and move them forward as a whole, those 8 inches. I don't need to move the full 8 inches, but the maximum movement I'm allowed to have is 8 inches. Now that being said, my Old Guard have moved. I'm going to continue my movement phase. I'm going to move my Voltigeurs here next, which they have a whopping 12 inches of movement. So I'm going to go ahead and measure from the base to get to the front door. I'm going to try to garrison this house. So that model's 6 inches away. That model's 6 inches from the door. That model's 7 inches, 7.5, you could argue, from the door. But all have enough range and then some to get through the door and into the house. So this group of Voltigeurs, I'm going to have garrisoned inside this building, and the way that you signify that they are garrisoned inside is that you place the models on top of the roof. They don't need to be standing up necessarily, as measuring distances are always measured from the exterior of the house. I've only just realized that this house doesn't appear to have buildings. So actually, we're not going to, or windows, sorry. So this house doesn't, without having windows, has no real purpose for us to sort of embark into that house, as they don't have windows. So ignoring that I did that this turn, as I'm learning, as I'm learning like you guys are, ignoring that, we'll have these infantry sort of start back where they started, and I will measure out their 12 inches that they're allowed to move, which gets me, actually gets me pretty close to that building. So again, I'll mark the ground, and I'll move everyone forward the 12 inches that they're allowed to move, which puts me about that far. My general, he's in a pretty good spot. We're not going to move the general. My line infantry here have 8 inches of movement as well, so we'll take the line tool. And after a few battles, you guys will memorize, how far units can move. You guys are going to memorize what the stats that they hit on are. So that's 7 inches there. So I'm going to take the time to just move that forward 7 inches. Again, with my unfortunate models not locking themselves. So I'm going to stagger. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. We're going to go ahead and just attach one of these before this gets carried away. There we go. We're going to go ahead and attach him. We'll delete them, and we're going to, that's better. We'll create 6 bases of these line infantry that we don't have to have that unfortunate problem where they shuffle around constantly. We'll move them forward the 8 inches that they could move. I'm going to stagger my front line a little bit here to get them positioned. Again, as long as I keep that 2-inch unit coherency, then we're good. My front line can be extended. I don't have to have 2 rows deep. I can have a single larger front line. It just different formations are going to leave you susceptible to different types of attacks, which you will obviously find out as you play. And certain strategies are developed within the RP themselves. So we'll go ahead and set up our line there. And then our cavalry at the back here, our cuirassiers, as Freds, get 25 inches of movement, so they get quite a bit of movement. And we're going to have them move straight forward. There's 20 inches there, so that's more than enough movement for our cuirassiers. So we'll go ahead and we'll move them forward roughly to there. And that allows me to have all of my units currently moved. I don't want to move my general. And my artillery are on raised ground, so I don't want to move them either. So the movement phase for the French player has now finished. The French player now moves on to his shooting phase. Shooting phase, all shooting attacks are started and completed per regiment. So what that means is this regiment here, as you can see, the 4th value, the R, is associated with range. My old guard have 14 inches of range. So clicking the base, I measure forward 14 inches. As you can see, the other British base there is 21.8, 21.7, so they're more than 14 inches. 14 inches only takes me to there. So I can't shoot them. They are not in range. Moving to my Voltigeurs here, I can see that their range is 13 inches, which obviously, as we know, isn't going to reach either, as 13 inches does not take us far enough, so they can't shoot either. My old guard are in a similar situation, or my line infantry, sorry. I believe that they only have 10 inches of range, so they are, of course, not in range of anything either. And my cavalry, my cuirassiers, do not have guns. My artillery in the game have a range equal to half of the battlefield. So that range will constantly change from battlefield to battlefield. But however, you measure the battlefield based on how you're fighting. So from one table edge to the next, I'm measuring 52.5, so we'll round up to 53, which is 26.5 inches. So measuring from the base again, I can measure out 26.5 inches. The cavalry are not in range, unfortunately. Unfortunately, nothing is really in range with my artillery, so they can't fire either. Line of sight is always something to be valued in this game. The artillery, as you can see, have a MS, a marksmanship of 5+. While they are on elevated ground, however, the marksmanship will increase from a 5+ to a 4+. All artillery get +1 to hit on elevated ground. They're also in cover as well as walls, fences, vegetation, things of that nature provide your enemy with a -1 to hit. So if my units are in cover and I'm being shot at by units that would hit me on a 4 normally, while I'm in cover, they in fact hit me on a 5. Units that are have garrisoned inside a building, your enemy receives -2 to hit those units while they're garrisoned inside the building. Only when being shot at, not in close combat. So, that being said, the French player now has none of their units that are within range of the British player to shoot them, and as such, the French player's turn for shooting has ended. We move now to the close combat phase. Just like with shooting, as shooting attacks are done per regiment, charging in close combat is done per regiment as well. The way that charging works is that an infantry unit must be within 12 inches maximum to be able to charge, as charging distance is 2d6 for infantry, and charging distance is 3d6 for cavalry. So cavalry need to be within 18 inches to declare a charge, and infantry need to be within 12 inches to declare a charge. As you can see, none of my units as the French player are within 12 or 18 inches of any of the British players, and as such I will not be declaring a charge this turn. The reason that you need to be within that distance is you can fail your charge. If I were to be within 12 inches, at 12 inches exactly, let's say, and rolled my 2d6, I got 2 1s, resulting in 2 inches, my charge is a fail. However, once you declare a charge, the defending player gets to roll Overwatch before you roll your charge distance. This could also impact you, as Overwatch may get rid of a frontline base, increasing the range that you now need to charge. If this increases your range to above 12 inches, you automatically fail your charge. Units on the battlefield have a 5-inch area of influence. So again, measuring from the base, you would measure out 5 inches. Enemy units cannot move closer than 5 inches of each other without declaring a charge. The reason for this is that staying 5 inches away before declaring a charge means that both cavalry and infantry, in theory, can fail the charge. Cavalry can fail a charge by simply rolling 3 ones, giving them a 3-inch charge, but seeing as they need to stay 5 inches away from enemy units, this results in a failed charge. Same applies to infantry models when charging. Area of influence of 5 inches is the maximum distance that you can approach an enemy before declaring a charge. So that being said, no charging is going to happen on my turn, which leaves me now to the morale phase and the final phase of each player's turn. During the morale phase, if your regiment as a whole has suffered 25% or more casualties during that particular turn, not during the battle, then that unit must roll a morale test. How a morale test works is you take the number of casualties that regiment has suffered and you roll a d6. You add the d6 number to the number of casualties, and if that total number exceeds their morale value, which is the final number value on these stats here, the 15 underneath the M, if the casualties and dice roll combined exceed that number, then the unit has failed the morale test. A unit that fails the morale test must immediately turn around and move their full movement towards the player's table edge. They cannot shoot or declare close combat, and they cannot fire Overwatch if charged at. They cannot do any other actions until passing a morale test on their subsequent morale phase on the following turn. So essentially you will lose an entire turn's use of that unit if they end up falling back. This is where the general's morale Inspire ability helps, as well as drummers, which give you an additional 3-inch movement a turn. Officers, which allows you to use the officer's morale during a morale test, which for the old guard here isn't beneficial, but for things like militia and line infantry, officers have better morale. And the flag bearer is regiments that rout while still having a flag bearer will automatically regroup during the following morale phase, meaning you won't have to re-roll that morale test to attempt to regroup. You will automatically regroup. When you take casualties, you can allocate casualties on your officer, on your flag bearer, or on your drummer, instead of allocating them to an infantry model. As the command square, none of the models on the command square are able to shoot guns. However, the passive abilities that the command square applies for each model are worthwhile. So at times you'll have to decide whether it's worthwhile to suffer casualties on your infantry or on your command squares, as sometimes you might need the extra few shots to perhaps get the 25% casualties on your enemy, inducing a morale test on them. But anyways, that is the French player's turn completed here, and now we will switch. Each player goes through each phase entirely on their turn before switching off to the opposite player. So, that being said, I will now take command of the British player, beginning again with my general's phase. I don't need to use Inspire, or I'm not anticipating that I'm going to use Inspire. But that being said, I'll measure out my distance from the general here, and I am just in range of catching the command square. So you know what, I'm going to go ahead and pop that Inspire ability. That will catch my line infantry regiment here, so they have been snagged by the Inspire. My artillery are out of range. My light infantry are in range, so they have been inspired as well, but my cavalry are also out of range. So I've used my once per battle Inspire ability, inspiring both my British light infantry and my British line infantry. That ends my general's phase. Moving on to the movement phase now, I'm going to again check my movement distances. So I have here British Hussars. They have a movement of 24 inches, so I'll go ahead and measure out. Now I'm interested in perhaps attacking these cavalry who are within range, but keeping in mind that I can only get within 5 inches because of their area of influence. So I'll mark that there where their area of influence is, and I will move these men, rotating them slightly to signify that they're running that direction. And I will only run them to within the maximum distance base to base, which is obviously at least 5 inches, so I'm 5.9 there. I can move a little bit closer as long as no base is less than 5 inches apart. So I've gone ahead and moved them. My line infantry here, they are going to garrison this building, as this building does have windows on both sides. They are all easily within at most 2 inches of the door, and they have 10 inches of movement each. So I'm going to go ahead and move these units into this building. That will mean that they are currently garrisoning this building from the inside. If you can get the units to sit atop the roof well enough, or even if they lie down, whatever ends up working, As long as you can find some way that you and your opponent agree upon, the men are signified inside that house. So I can't get them to stand up right now. So I will just keep note that they are in fact. There we go. I can lock them in place quickly as I drop them onto the roof. So where you place them inside the building isn't super important, provided that you don't place them further than their movement allowed. So as I was right in front of the door there and had about 10 inches of movement, I have a rough, vague idea of where they would be allowed. And where, sort of they're within range of each other. So I've got them all on the buildings there. So whenever you shoot with buildings that are garrisoned inside a building, you measure from the wall. So as you see, I measure from the window. You don't have to measure from the actual positions of the models inside. But if the models are on this particular part of the building, measure from one of these windows. If your models are in the center part, measure from one of these windows. If your models are from the end, measure from one of, etc., etc., etc. Always try to apply logic to your battles. So I've moved them inside this building, and my British light infantry now have -2 to hit when they're shot at, meaning light infantry who hit on 4s or Old Guard who hit on 2s. Old Guard now hit my light infantry on 4s instead, and these line hit them on 6s instead. So buildings provide quite a good buff for cover. These line infantry now that get 8 inches of movement, we're going to go ahead and move them forward those full 8 inches. So that takes me to there. So I'll go ahead and snag them and move them forward as a whole, which moves them to there. Brilliant. My artillery at the back don't need to move as they're in a good spot. They are not on elevated ground, however, so they will not get the bonus to hit, so they will only hit on 5s. That being said, now we've moved all of the British players, or all the British units, and we will move on to the shooting phase. So British line infantry, I believe, have 10 inches of shooting, and note they have 12 inches line infantry for the British, so British line are perhaps a little better than average. They are just out of range of the French Old Guard and cannot reach them, so they will not be shooting. The line infantry have 15 inches of range, but as very much the same effect. They are not in range of them or the French line, unfortunately. So neither of my British units there can shoot. However, my artillery in the back, we decided that 26.5 was the range for this battlefield, and they are also just out of range of shooting these French Old Guard. Moving on now to the cavalry. On the far right flank, neither the British Hussars nor the French Cuirassiers have guns, so they will not need to have any shooting during this phase, and so as that ends the shooting phase for the British player. We now move to the close combat phase. For the close combat phase, we're going to go ahead and do the cavalry combat first, as they are the only one within 12 inches, and again are the only units that are even eligible to make a charge. So, my British Hussars are going to charge the French Cuirassiers. The Cuirassiers do not have any guns, and as such cannot fire Overwatch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and roll my 3 dice as I declare a charge. Cavalry roll 3 dice in total, so I've got 3, 3, and 1. So that gives me a 7 for a successful charge. For the charge to be successful, you need to get within base contact. So 7 inches means that I can get base contact, I can get base contact, and I can get just base contact essentially there. I mean, base contact means basically if you can get within half an inch of a base, that counts as base contact. So all these models can certainly get within, and what's more is as long as one of your models can get within base contact, you can move the rest of your regiment models as far forward as you're allowed. Once you've got into successful combat, the attacking player in close combat the current player's turn always goes first. That player gets a 3-inch pile-in. So let's say these regiments were bigger and I could unfortunately only get one base about this far. That base is not within range of being able to attack. To be able to attack, you must be within base contact or within 1 inch or within base contact of one of your own models that is within base contact. So when I get my 3-inch pile-in move, I've got the ability to move this base forward 3 inches. So what I'll do, obviously in that situation, I would move that base forward 3 inches to be better in range, to be better able to spread out my attacks. So these 3 bases here have all successfully got into close combat, and so I'm going to rally up more dice for myself so that I have enough dice. As you can see here, cavalry on the third last slot is A for attacks. Now attacks apply only for close combat. S, which is the previous category, is shots. Shots applies only for shooting phase. So each of these cavalry make 2 attacks, and each of these cavalry have 2 wounds each that they need to suffer before being killed. So with 2 cavalry per base, that's 4 dice that are being rolled for each base, as each model gets 2 attacks. So I know to go ahead and copy that 3 times for the 3 bases in total. We'll leave these dice to the side. We're going to go ahead and roll these dice, so we'll go ahead and roll those. We can see that their WS, their weapon skill, is a 4+, which applies to hit and wound. So all of the dice that are 4s or better as a 4+, count as successful hits. So of those dice, we got 5 successful hits, so we'll move these other dice to the side as to not be confused. And just like the hit was a 4+, to wound is also a 4+, so we'll roll again. And each successful 4+ is a wound, so only one of those was a successful wound, meaning one cuirassier has lost 1 wound, so we'll go ahead and delete the rider on top of the horse. This leaves you with a riderless horse model, indicating that that model currently only has 1 more wound. They can still attack and function as normal. It's just a way of keeping track that that model has lost the wound. Now, the attacking player has run out of attacks, as each model gets 2. The current player's turn always goes first in close combat, and the defending player does, however, get a turn to attack back. So now the defending player will get to attack back, meaning that model that has 1 wound still gets 2 attacks because it's still an intact model. So each cuirassier gets 2 wounds, allowing the French player to attack with the same amount of dice that the British player did. So the French player would also now get their 3-inch pile-in before they made their attacks. Now, in this particular situation, I have no need to make a 3-inch pile-in, as I'm already in base contact of each of the models. So that being said, I will go ahead and roll. My cuirassiers, they hit and wound on a 2+. They are significantly better in close combat than the light hussars, light cavalry hussars they're fighting against. So I've rolled my dice, and only 1 dice is less than a 2. All the other dice successfully hit. I'm going to roll, and they each successfully wound as well on a 2+. So removing the 1s that did not successfully wound. Well, I got a lot of 1s there, 4 1s that roll. I'm left with 2, 4, 6, 7 wounds. So what that will do is I will now go and remove wounds. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That deletes that base. 5, 6, 7. When you take models casualties off of a base, all subsequent casualties must continually be taken off of that base until that base is removed, and then you move on to the next base. You can choose which bases receive the casualties, provided they are the closest row of bases. So in close combat, if you have 2 rows of models that are fighting, casualties must always be taken from the bases that are closest to the enemy, which is always essentially the front row. However, you can decide which base in the front row, as long as all of the casualties are taken on that same base until that base is removed. Then you can pick the new base, as long as it meets the same requirements of being in the closest row to the enemy. So, with that being done now, these 2 units are currently locked in close combat until the end of the close combat phase, when the morale phase happens, and as you can see, the British player here has lost more than 25% of the models, not the wounds, but the models in this unit, and as such will have to roll a morale test. But all charging and close combats are done before moving on to the next phase. So you just take a note that you need to make a morale test here, and we move on to any other close combat phases that are currently happening. As we've already discussed, though, no one else is within the 12 inches to charge, as we'll go ahead and make a point here. The British are with far 12.9, meaning they can't get to within close combat or base contact. Sorry, they're within 14.9 there. They are not in close combat range, so they will not be charging. So that being said, we'll move right to the morale phase for these British Hussars, which lost a total of 5 models. They still have this model here, as it still exists. Oh, sorry, they only had 1 base. I do apologize. So they lost 3 models. So the morale is 11. So a D6, which at maximum is a 6, plus the amount of models lost, which is 3, as a max number gives you 9, meaning that it's impossible for this unit to exceed their morale of 11, meaning that they cannot fail the morale test this turn. This is the advantage of cavalry, which have greater morale in smaller numbers, but are so impactful in the game that a full regiment of cavalry is only 20 models. So for morale to suffer and break in cavalry, it's quite difficult for that to happen unless you're fighting against cavalry who are exceptionally good at fighting other cavalry, such as French cuirassiers or Lancer or Ulan cavalry. Hussars are more meant to take, they have more movement and are meant to use to flank infantry
but I'm simply using them as an example here of showing you guys close combat. Again, this is not a strategically brilliant battle that's going on. It's just more to document and showcase how things work. So I know now that my morale phase, I don't have any other morale tests to make, and as such my morale phase is over as the British player. We now swap back over to the French player. As such, I'm going to use my Inspire ability on my general, and I go ahead and measure. 12 inches does in fact catch my line, and it just catches the Old Guard as well. So both my Old Guard and line are going to be have the Inspire ability. Now the British troops have the Inspire ability as well. Inspire ability lasts until your following general's phase. So obviously on your phase, the enemy doesn't get a chance to shoot you during your turn. So on the enemy's turn, if you have a morale issue now, you have still been inspired, and the Inspire does last until your next general's phase. So the British player does have the Inspire affecting both his line and his light infantry. So I've used Inspire on my French general, giving the Inspire to both my Old Guard and the line infantry, and I will move now on to my movement phase. So my movement phase, we're going to go ahead and measure the line infantry, who can move a whopping 8 inches. Now we'll just check that from there to there. That's more than 5 inches for their area of influence, which is perfect. So I'll go ahead and mark that, and I will move my Old Guard forward. Oh lordy, we'll go ahead and rewind time a second there, just because we're not big fans of how that sort of how that goes. So this is just a better point of reference that lock your men to your bases, as it definitely saves you a headache. As many surfaces on the battlefield are going to be uneven, so the point of moving soldiers around is going to become quite difficult, and as such I would recommend that you always lock your bases and your models so that you can move regiments as a whole and save time. I'm not going to, well, maybe we'll bother trying to reset just a couple of them up there just so they don't look so sloppy. I guess this base is slanted slightly, so we'll just go ahead and let them lie for the sake of saving time here. They've moved their full distance. My Voltigeurs have, I believe they only have 10 inches, 12 inches of movement. So the front door of this building obviously is in the front here, so can I even get, I can get 8 inches to there. You know what, we're not even going to get inside the building, because that's, I think we're just going to move my Voltigeurs up to being behind cover here, behind these sandbag cover. So we'll go ahead and move my line infantry. Now you don't want to, if you have the majority of the unit in cover, they can choose to shoot specifically at the units that aren't in cover. So like this, as this guy on the end here, perhaps maybe doesn't get his cover as he's not behind the sandbags here. So they can choose to shoot at the regiment as a whole, which would mean that they get the cover as the majority of the regiment is behind cover, or they can choose to shoot specifically the models that aren't behind cover, meaning that they may score 10 wounds, but there's only one model not in cover. So if they choose specifically to shoot the model not in cover, so he does not get the bonus, it will not matter how many wounds they deal, their shots will only apply to the model not in cover. If they choose to shoot the regiment as a whole, as long as the majority of the regiment is in cover, they will receive the cover bonus. The only difference where this applies is units in houses. If you have some units in a house and some not in the house, even if it's the majority, only the units in the house get the +2 to hit. The units outside the house do not get any bonus to cover regardless. So, that being said, I will continue moving my models. Go ahead and move my my line infantry here, who get 8 inches of movement. We'll go ahead and sort of maneuver myself into a bit of a pincer move here against the British. Move them forward there 8 inches, and move my command square as well. So if I get to the front door here, we can obviously, I can get inside the building and attempt to challenge the light infantry inside the building in close combat, which we may or may not do. Moving on to my cavalry here, who are still locked in close combat. As the enemy didn't rout, we are still locked in close combat. I only have 2 options here since it's my turn. I can choose during my movement phase to have these cavalry units retreat. Now retreating is different than routing. If you retreat, you still must move your full movement distance toward your table edge. However, you can still shoot in your shooting phase. You cannot charge in your close combat phase, so it doesn't make as much sense for cavalry unless you know certainly that you are losing. In this particular instance, I will not be retreating my cavalry, as I definitely feel I have the upper hand in this close combat. If anything, I want to get another round of combat in and make my enemy rout, or maybe have them retreat and be able to chase them. So we're not currently in the close combat phase, so I'm going to have them stay locked in combat. I'm not going to have them retreat during my movement phase. So the last unit I have to move is my general. I believe generals move 20 inches off the top of my head, as I don't have my general marked, so we'll go ahead and just move him the minimum distance, which gets me right about there. The other beauty about generals is they can only be targeted to be shot at if they are the closest model to the unit that is shooting. So even though I might be in range of some of these stuff that is shooting, the only way they can shoot my general is if he is the closest model. Where this gets tricky is if that you have infantry models that have to make a rout or a retreat. They have to retreat or rout their full movement distance, which could put them behind the general that you currently have. This could make your general a target on subsequent phases to be shot at. Now, that is my movement phase ended. We're going to now move to my shooting phase. I believe my infantry are in range to shoot, so we can demonstrate some infantry shooting now. So, my old guard here, we'll start with at the front. Their range to shoot is 14 inches. Take the line tool, measure from the base. I'm within 6 inches of the British line infantry. The way that shooting works is only the front row of bases in a regiment, which can be 10 bases maximum. And as, like I said, you can rearrange your regiments to be just one long solid line, or they can have depth, but only the front row of bases can fire, and only casualties can only be taken from the closest row of bases. So, as you can see here, I have 4 models in my front row. So I have 4 models which can shoot at the enemy models. Each of my old guard, as you see, the S value has a 2, meaning each of my old guard make 2 shots. As I have 4 models on a base, that's 8 shots per base, 2 bases in the front row, is a total of 16 shots. So we have how many dice here? We have 3, 6, so that's 6 dice, that's 9 dice, that's 12, and this is actually 16 dice in total, perfect. So as my 16 dice here, I'm going to roll, and I hit with my shooting attack on 2+. So there's 1, 1. Everything else seems to have hit on a 2+, so we will roll again, and wounding and hitting is always the same, unless otherwise stated, so they wound on a 2+ as well. I missed 1, so I know that I rolled 16 dice. I've missed with 2 in total for hitting and wounding, meaning I have 14 wounds, so the British player now must subtract 14 models from their front row. If you run out of models in the front row, the casualties do spill over into the second row or onto the command square, whatever you'd like to take. So they have 4 models there, so that's 4 models gone. 4 models there, that's 4 models gone. 4 models there, that's 4 models gone. That's 12, so they now lose 2 models, and here's the actual issue with where locking models comes into play. As I can't delete 2 models off of this, I will go to description and write two models on base. So now I can just simply right click, and as that player, I'll know that there's some models, so I know that there's 2 models on that base. So when they go to shoot now, because I've locked them to the base and cannot delete them as an individual model, I've got to keep track, 2 models on base. I know that next following turn there's only 2 models on this base. The reason is that they have 1 wound each, so obviously each successful wound takes a model off, so they've lost those. During their morale phase, they will obviously have to roll a morale check as well, as they've lost more than 25% of that regiment. So that is that unit has shot. Moving now to my Voltigeurs on the side, have 13 inches of range. Is it 13 inches of range? Yep. So again, I'll measure from the base. 13 inches definitely gets me in combat of all of them. So only the front row of my Voltigeurs again can fire, so they only get 3 shots. My Voltigeurs hit on a 3+, hit and wound on a 3+, so I'll roll my 3 dice. Ba-ba-da-ba. I only got 1 that was above a 3, so we'll roll it again. It's a 6 again, so the British have lost another model. So just like before, you must continue taking models from the same base, so I'll detract that to 1 model on base. So I know there's 1 model left on that base on the following turn. My Voltigeurs have now shot. My line infantry, whose range is 10 inches. And again, when you lock units, attach them to the base, you need to go ahead and rename them as all the individual names. So as you can see, I could rename them with line infantry and stats, which I would do ahead of time. I'd be prepared for the battle. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and measure to the windows. So as you see, I have about 5.5, 6 inches to the window. definitely puts me in range. My front row of bases has 12 models in total. My light infantry get 1 shot each, so that is 12 shots. They are shooting at the British light infantry that are garrisoned inside of that building. So normally my light infantry hit on a 4+. Because those light infantry are garrisoned inside that building, they now hit on a 6+, as they get a -2 to hit. So I will now roll my, I had 16 dice before, so I know I have 12 shots, so I'll just quickly take 4 dice out, roll my 12 shots, so they hit on 6s because they're inside a building, so I have 1 6, 2 6, 3 6s, that was a decent roll. So those 3 6s, you roll again, so the the negative modifier to hit is only to hit, it is never to wound. This applies for all cover. It is only a negative to hit. So rolling to wound is still a 4+, their natural value. So I roll these dice. I get 1 that's a 4+, so the defending player now chooses which model. I'll choose this one. Boom, they've lost a single light infantry model from that squad. That is just over, they have not suffered 25% casualties as they only had 5 models, so they do not need to make a morale test yet. They are good. Moving on to the last bit of shooting, which I have my artillery in the back here. Units that are locked in close combat cannot be shot at. So my artillery models here, although they are in range of the enemy cavalry, cannot shoot at them. You can shoot at buildings. These buildings, however, are too far away from me at the moment. Buildings have wound characteristics associated with them. Right now, all general house buildings have 10 wounds. Artillery have the ability to deal 6 damage per shot, and buildings have 10 wounds each. If buildings are destroyed, you will roll a dice total equal to the number of models inside, and we will figure out a system based on the casualties that you will suffer. If the building is collapsed, the player who destroyed the building rolls a d20. The defending player rolls a d20. The casualties that you suffer will be the difference between the two. So let's say if the French player were to roll a 20 on his dice and the defending player rolls a 10, when that building collapses, 10 of his models are destroyed. The rest of the remaining models survive. Up to 40 models can be garrisoned inside of a standard house. Small farmhouses will have maybe a garrison of half of that value. So anyways, they are not in range of the cannons. The cannons cannot shoot the cavalry that are locked in close combat, so the French artillery will not be firing this turn. That is all of the shooting for the French player completed. So we'll move on now to morale phase, which these British line infantry lost a whopping, they had 12 models in the front, and they've lost 3 from this, so that's 15 models. So they've lost 15 models. The morale is only 10, so they will definitely fail the morale. You don't even need to roll, because 15 plus even a 1 when you roll a d6 is still greater than 10, so they've automatically failed their morale. What they will do is they will turn around on the spot, and they will move their full distance, which is 8 inches from where they are. So they will move 8 inches directly back toward their table edge. And seeing as they are routing, they will not be able to shoot or declare a charge until they pass the morale test on their subsequent turn. However, because they have the flag bearer present, they can automatically regroup on the following morale phase. They do not need to roll for it. However, they are currently retreating. And that is all of the shooting done on the shooting phase there. Moving now to the close combat. Before you continue with any ongoing close combats, you must declare any new legal charges. So, to legally charge with these into a building, you need to measure to the front door. To successfully charge to the front door, you need to make sure that that you can gain enough range to get to the front door. So 7.5 inches is what I need, and we always round up. So 8 inches is what you need to get to the door. And as they can charge a total of 12, I am going to attempt to make a charge into this building. The defending player now, who is being charged, because the defending player has guns, they are able to fire Overwatch from inside the house. Overwatch can only ever hit on a 6, regardless of what the unit's shooting value is. Overwatch only ever hits on a 6 and cannot be modified unless specifically stated by a unit ability. So the British player here has 4 light infantry models who are positioned inside this house. They each get, as you can see, they each get 3+ to hit, and do not get the additional +1 to hit or 5-inch range, as they did move during their movement phase. So those 4 models are now going to roll their Overwatch. A 6+ is a successful hit. They have 1 6+. Now, just like with shooting with the negative modifier, the 6+ to hit only applies to hit. When you successfully hit during Overwatch, you roll to wound with your normal wound value, which for light infantry is a 3+. So they will then roll the dice. They successfully rolled a 3+. So now these light infantry, as again I've locked the models to the base, I will just have to put three models on base. So I now know on the following turn, and you could even put some sort of a marker to signify this if you wanted, if it was an easier way for you. What you can even do is take this dice, and you can have it flipped over to 3, and you can put the 3 beside, signifying, because casualties are always taken off the same base until that base is deleted. It's always might be easier just to mark that base with a dice, and have that dice read the current number of wounds that are on that base. That's another easy way of doing it. That way it's a visual reminder to you as the player. Now, they suffered that one wound there from the defending players. Overwatch is always calculated before you even roll the charge. So now I can go ahead and roll my charge. We know I needed an 8 to be successful. I got a 5 and a 6, which gives me an 11. So that gives me enough to get to the front door, and as well with my 3-inch pylon, my entire regiment now is able to get inside. So the way that close combat works inside of a building is that your regiment can attack with up to 20 models a turn, even if the whole regiment is inside the building fighting. You can attack with up to 20 models per turn while inside. So the defending player obviously doesn't have 20 models to fight me with, but as the French player here has 24 models, or 23, sorry, seeing as I lost 3 models on that base, I now know that I have a total of 23 models, but can only attack with 20 of them. So I'll be rolling 20 dice in close combat. Or could choose, same with my commander, I can choose to attack with my commander as well, or one of my line infantry. The flag bearer and drummer also get to attack in close combat and have values on them as well. So the negative to hit bonus again does not apply when you're in close combat. It is only in shooting, as you don't get the benefits of cover when you're fighting in close combat. So once again, as the attacking player, being inside the building, you don't need to get too fussy with moving the bases around. You and the defending player know that you're fighting inside the building. And as such, I'm going to go ahead and roll my 20 dice. So we knew this was 16 dice before. So we're just going to highlight 4 of these dice, copy and paste. Grab these dice, and we're going to go ahead and roll them. Now, I know that my line infantry have a 4+ to hit in close combat. So you'll look through the dice for all the 4+. You'll take everything out that's not a 4 or higher. Or you can do the opposite way, depending on what the dice roll, if it's easier to remove the numbers that you're going to use out. So I've removed everything that's a 4+ there. I'll take the dice, roll again to wound, and again all 4+ will be a wound. So we'll remove everything less than a 4 again. So we know now that I've successfully given 6 wounds. So that is more models than the British player has in defense. So the British player is going to delete all 4 of these models now. And the British player has lost this building. It is now currently garrisoned by the French. The French player doesn't have enough movement to... you can't move after, obviously, shooting in close combat. So the French player is now garrisoned inside this building and has that building. Their men get... the enemies shooting at them get a -2 to hit. So we'll go ahead and we know that our men are garrisoned in there. We can go ahead and signify that if we wanted by placing all of our units, on top of the house, just like the British player did. So we'll go ahead and... oh, we unlocked the house there for a second. That was my bad. So the rewind button at the top is very handy if you accidentally misclick something during a battle, accidentally delete the wrong thing. Rewind buttons are available. The defending player shouldn't really be touching models on their turn, meaning that if someone needs to rewind, it is always in the hands of the attacking player, meaning that games don't get lost and shuffled around. So I'm going here and signifying that my units are all inside this building. And so just like with close combat, when you go to shoot with models, you can shoot with up to 20 models a turn that are garrisoned inside a building, regardless of the number that are physically inside. So we know that they finished the turn inside there. And we move now to our other locked close combat. Remember, you always do new combats first, move to existing combats. If you have more than one existing combat, you don't need to do them in order that they happened, as long as you do the new combats first and move to existing combats after. So here we are with this existing combat. Again, the attacking player rules first. So I'll go ahead and grab the same amount of dice here. These same dice. I have to count them quickly, but that's okay. What you can do as a defending player too is you can get groups of dice set up beside your units while the other player is going, as you know like what shots you'll be taking, and then it's easy just to remove dice based on casualties. But anyways, I know that I've got 2 attacks per model here. I've got 8 models, so we know we've got 16 attacks. So we got 5, 6, that's 10 dice with those, 4, 2, so that's 16 dice here. So we know that our cuirassiers hit on 2+, so we roll these. Every successful 2+ is a hit, so we missed with 1 there. We missed with a couple there. We missed with 1 there. So we'll go ahead and add these dice. We'll roll these dice again. 2+ to wound. They're all successful wounds except for 1, so we know that they only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wounds left here. They obviously suffered significantly more than 5 wounds, so we know that this player is going to delete all their bases. And now in our next movement phase, this frees our cavalry up to move. Keep in mind they cannot move now, as that is not their movement phase. They were unable to, we had the option to retreat or stay in combat during our movement phase. We chose to stay in combat. We have now successfully wiped that cavalry squad, and our cavalry are free to move on our turn. That is the end of the close combat phase, as I don't have any other units that are locked in close combat. Normally we would have morale phase, however both of the units that would have had to take morale phases were wiped out completely, and now as such don't need to take morale checks. At this point it would probably be the British players will probably realize they've lost. The British player and subsequently every player on their turn has the option to retreat. If they want to they can retreat with individual regiments strategically, and they don't have to leave the battlefield. But a unit that retreats or routes off of your table edge counts as having left the battlefield and cannot re-enter the battlefield during the course of the battle. You can automatically regroup from retreating. You do not need to make morale tests. Retreating and routing are different. If you want to retreat your entire army, you can declare, so as the British player now, I'll simulate that I'm going to declare my entire army is retreating. So the opposite player can choose to allow me to successfully retreat, which will save both players time. If he allows me to retreat, the battle is over. I declare that I'm retreating, my units retreat, and the enemy allows me to retreat from the field, ending the battle. The opposite player, though, can continue to harass me, but keeping in mind that retreating is different than routing. So while units retreat, they can't charge in close combat, but they can still fight on their turn if they are charged, and can still make shots while retreating. Their shots will always hit on 6+, just like with Overwatch while retreating, but they can still shoot. So it could be risky to chase down units that are retreating, as they can stop retreating, as retreating is voluntary, and then on their subsequent movement phase, if they declare that they're no longer retreating, they can then turn, shoot you with their full value, and declare a charge. So the attacking player may not want to risk casualties and may allow the other player to retreat right off the battlefield with their entire army, especially if they know that they've won. So I am going to declare that I'm retreating as the British player. I forgot actually that I used the Inspire ability for those light infantry, so they wouldn't have had to roll the morale phase, but they were wiped completely anyways. And it's actually the light infantry were actually caught by the Inspire, and I forgot didn't have to roll their morale phase, their morale check, because the Inspire ability actually triggered. That's my mistake. As you see, I got a little caught up. It's a bit late at night while I'm doing this. So the British actually did not need to roll morale. However, for the sake of this battle, it's not going to matter. This turn, they were going to declare that they retreat anyways. We'll just sort of imply that maybe they didn't get snagged by the Inspire to continue the mechanics. My General's phase is first, like always. I have no Inspire ability to use, and as such, my General's phase is null and void, essentially. Moving on from the General's phase, we move to my movement phase. I'm going to have this army continue to retreat, as they're not going to regroup, or they're routing. I'm going to declare that I'm retreating, meaning I don't need them. I don't want them to reroute. And anyways, my morale phase is at the end. They cannot currently they can currently regroup, but until my morale phase, they are unable to regroup. So my movement phase comes first. So they were routing last turn. They must continue to route toward my table edge. For the sake of them not falling over, I'm not gonna. You have to always move them as far as you can towards your table edge, and you must always go through models. Like I said earlier, you cannot have your base end on top of another models. So they take the shortest route towards your table edge always. So they continue routing towards the table edge here. I'm declaring that I'm retreating this, so my cavalry are going to turn. They get 4 inches of movement without becoming horse artillery, without unlimbering. So with their 4 inches of movement, that'll move them off the battlefield, meaning my artillery have successfully left the battlefield. My infantry obviously will need 1 more turn before they can reach off the battlefield, but they are currently routing. My shooting phase, routing armies cannot shoot, and my artillery have already voluntarily retreated, so my shooting phase will have nothing to go by. My close combat phase, nothing is within charging range of the enemy, so I will not have any close combat. During the morale phase, as I have a flag bearer, they will automatically regroup during the morale phase. I do not need to make a morale check. And you may ask that because the original morale check is higher than their morale and they couldn't have possibly passed, every subsequent turn that you make a morale check, the casualty count of models is reduced by 50%. So even though I lost 16 models or whatever it was, 15 models, 11 models, take that number and divide it by half every subsequent turn that you have another morale check. So every subsequent morale check will become 50% easier to succeed on. However, they automatically pass because of the flag bearer, and I'm planning to retreat anyways. So I'm not. They're obviously not. They're no longer routing, and as such can fire Overwatch now that they're being charged from behind. If they're charged or anything like that, can fire Overwatch. It's not likely that they're going to get in range of being charged by anything, however. So, and as such, that will end my turn. I don't have a morale phase as I don't have any units that were reduced below 25%. Keep in mind, it's 25% per turn. So even though these models here have had 25% of their casualties, it was not during this turn, and as such, don't need to roll morale. My general, of course, during his movement phase would obviously retreat as well, taking your general off the field. Obviously, during games, during battles, you're not going to want to have all or nothing battles. Retreating will be a strategic part of values and battles, and the only thing we didn't unfortunately get to demonstrate, just because of how it worked out in this battle, are artillery. So artillery have 1 shot each, but have the ability to deal d6 damage. So on a successful hit, you will roll a dice with artillery, and that number on the dice will be the subsequent number of models that you will remove from the enemy that is hit. Meaning artillery have the ability to take 1 casualty or 6 casualties per shot, depending on if they hit. As I stated before, if they are on raised ground, they get +1 to hit. If they are on flat ground, they hit on their normal values. They can also fire canister shots. What this will allow you to do is, instead of firing a single shot to hit for d6 damage, they can fire 3 shots to hit for d3 damage, allowing them to have a total of 9 damage, but spread across 3 shots. Obviously the range for canister shot is only 6 inches, and as I will demonstrate here, 6 inches is significantly shorter, but it's still within outside of their area of influence, meaning that artillery can fire Overwatch as a canister shot. That being said, that today demonstrates, the only other thing that I will show you to demonstrate is the ability to form square, which is on most line infantry and infantry of other types. So for the sake of this battle, we'll say that this battle has ended today. I don't know why I can't grab the space here. It's being difficult. We'll use the British player base for the... So when you form square, it depends on the number of units that you have. If you have a full regiment, which we will demonstrate, a full regiment is 10 infantry bases plus a command square. I have 6 infantry bases here, so we'll go ahead and we will copy 1, 2, 3, 4 to have the total number of infantry bases. So when forming square, you would have your command square inside the square, and then you would have your other bases set up properly around. We'll move them over 1 actually to give you a better idea here. So the proper way to form square, when you form square with your men, is to do it, with a full regiment, is to do it as such. You can get as fancy and turn the models outward, which is really good. Units that are in square that are charged by cavalry will suffer right off the bat d6 wounds. You don't need to roll or hit. If they charge you in square, the cavalry regiment will automatically suffer d6 wounds before any combat begins, and that is the advantage of forming square. Forming square takes your movement though, so you're not allowed to move forward or back. Forming square and reforming the line both take your movement for the turn, and don't allow you to move forward or back. Artillery can also limber and unlimber. So if you limber or unlimber, you can take your movement and one of those actions. You cannot limber, move, and unlimber, but you can move and limber or unlimber and move. And then artillery move 4 inches while limbered and move 10 inches while unlimbered. And when they're unlimbered, there'll be horse models that you can use to signify that they're unlimbered and being moved by horses. I believe that covers all of the basics for battles, and just like with the campaign map, I'm likely missing a few things. Things like cavalry move half their speed within forests, and probably a few other bits and pieces, but that are the basics of battle. And as such, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Of course, with anything else, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the server. Thank you. Have a good night, guys.